guys, it's Kevin in my review for Falling. So what Falling is essentially about is we center on the character of John, and he is this pilot that used to live in this very rural sort of home, but he's since escaped that and gone to a more city sort of suburban area. But because of the fact that his father is suffering from dementia, he decides to pay him a visit, and in doing so, hopes to finally turn his father around. He's grown very problematic and really wants to do what he can to try to find him a home, but also hopefully finally make amends with his father and get back on the right foot and maybe turn his father's life in a better direction. So Falling overall, I was not really that excited for this film. This seemed like one of those films that Viggo Mortensen is trying to do in an effort to get an Oscar, in an effort to do something that he really hasn't done before. It felt very desperate, I think is the best way to sum it up. It felt like a very desperate film and just didn't really seem like something that was going to be all that great, but after watching it, this film's pretty horrible. This is definitely not a good film at all. Falling is easily, I think, one of the most uncomfortable and just horribly made watches that I've seen in quite a bit. There's a lot of things about this film that just really doesn't work very much at all, but we're just getting to right now, starting off with the cast. There are definitely some things about this film that do kind of save it from being one of the worst things ever. But not much, definitely. Viggo Mortensen, as you expect, is good in this movie. He does the best that he can, playing this character of John. I will say it is definitely more one note than usual, but he does still do a good job of showcasing this character's plight, showcasing who this character really is, the fact that he has turned things around, the fact that he is in a different place in his life. I think Mortensen does do a good job of that, but he also does a really good job of really showcasing the discontent for his father and why he left all of this behind. And I do think Mortensen does do a good job in this role. He's probably the most consistent thing about this movie overall. I thought his performance was definitely pretty good, especially towards the latter half of the film. He definitely has some good stuff to work with, and I do think he did a good job in this movie overall. Fortunately, the rest of the actors here, that really can't be said, because they are pretty bad, especially when it comes to Lance Henriksen, who plays the character of Willis. His performance in this film could not be more one note. I mean, he seems to think that the way to portray this really bitter and just really horrible guy is to just scream a lot like this and to look to the side, and it's just a really bad performance overall. Nothing about this performance feels real. It honestly feels like Henriksen himself was annoyed. It didn't feel like he wanted to be here. He puts very little effort into it. It's just a lot of him screaming throughout the whole thing, and it just becomes very tiring after a while. There needed to be a lot more to this character, and Henriksen just isn't really willing to go for it. It's a very subpar performance, and I was not very impressed by what he did here at all. Neither is Sverrir Gudnason, who plays the younger version of Willis. I thought was terrible here. He does this horrible job at playing this character. I mean, I think the biggest issue with him is that he doesn't even feel like a real person. He has this permanent scowl on his face, and that's kind of all he does here. At no point it does it feel real, at no point does it feel authentic. It just feels phony, and I don't think he did a very good job with that at all in this film. I thought his performance definitely rang pretty hollow here. Linney is doing the best that she can, but she really doesn't feel like she has much to do here at all. She feels pretty wasted. Same with Hannah Gross and Chen. Just overall acting-wise, besides Mortensen, nobody really is all that great here. It's the directing and the writing, because Oh boy, this is where we get to the things that really, really bring this film down. I mean, Viggo Mortensen's directing, I don't know what he's trying to go for here. I really don't. It really feels like Viggo Mortensen watched, like, say, The Father, for example, which the poster for this film is very eerily similar to that one, and I don't think that's by coincidence. I think Viggo Mortensen, he watched The Father, and he's like, that's a great film. I really like that this film is a thing. Let me make my own version of that, and now we have Falling. But the problem is, this film is lacking any sort of style. It's lacking any sort of direction. I don't really know what Mortensen was trying to go for here. At points, this feels almost like emotional porn. It really does. It feels very much like that. Honestly, it's like one step behind misery porn, I think is the best way to describe it. It very much does feel that way in terms of the directing here. There isn't a lot of style. It doesn't really feel like Mortensen knew what he wanted to do with this film in terms of the directing, and it really does show here. It feels like kind of anything goes, and I don't really think it works here at all. And again, there's a lot of things that Viggo Mortensen is talented at. He's a very talented actor, but a director, he is very much not. And I don't think this is something that he's going to have in his future that much. I mean, I know a lot of actors are trying to do both. They're trying to dabble into the directing side of things, but this is probably one of the most desperate and shallow attempts that I've seen in quite a bit. I was not impressed with the directing in this film very much at all. I think it definitely brings this film down for sure. And the writing as well here, though, is all kinds of bad. I mean, the premise alone, it's not really the premise of this movie. That's the thing. Like, yes, John is a gay man, and yes, he has abandoned this life, but we don't really get to dive into that at all. We don't really get to see who, he's really become. The film isn't really focused on his life now contrasted with his life then. In fact, he's not even really the main character of this film. The main character, for some reason, is the father of this movie. Willis, as a character, is truly one of the most just unlikable and disgusting main characters that I can think of in such a long time. At no point in this film do you want to follow this guy. This guy is rude, he's foul, he's homophobic, he's sexist, he's transphobic, he's just every kind of phobic that you can think of. He's the kind of parent that you want nothing to do with, that when you have your friends, you don't want to speak of that relative. And for some reason, that is the character we're following throughout this entire thing. And on paper, that sounds kind of interesting. I think, okay, maybe the film dives into why he is this way. The film maybe gives us a chance to see him change. No, the film does absolutely nothing with him. He's just this bumbling, old, grumpy, old fuck throughout the majority of this movie, and he's so negative about literally everything. There isn't a single thing in this movie that he's positive about. Every single time something good happens, this guy kills the mood instantly. And again, this is the guy we're following throughout this entire movie. We have to, for some reason, be stuck with this guy. And I just didn't understand this choice. I didn't understand why they decided to go about it. I also didn't understand why we focus on him and not Viggo Mortensen's character, who clearly is the more likable protagonist. Again, he's someone that has abandoned this entire thing, and you think he's trying to turn his dad's view on things around. He's trying to change up his views on things, because Viggo Mortensen is gay. He has a husband, and this is something that Willis very much does not approve of. In fact, he's pretty angry about it. He's pretty angry about everything, but especially that. He wants absolutely nothing to do with it. And again, you would think that you would take the time to really get to see who he is. And there are flashbacks in this movie, but what purpose do they serve? I don't know. I mean, there's really nothing to any of these flashbacks here. We have this scene where Viggo Mortensen's character, when he was young, he like carried around this dead bird of sorts, and we don't really know what that's all about. And then they keep cutting to this birthday party. You think something's gonna happen, and there just isn't anything that happens in terms of those flashbacks. The flashbacks have almost no merit on this film entirely, and so you wonder why they're even here. What is the point of them? What are they really serving? It really just feels like they're here to add to the runtime. So they had something to do, but it doesn't give us any it doesn't really give us a comprehensive look into who this character is. It doesn't tell us anything new about this character. It kind of just tells us he's been horrible from the beginning, and that just isn't enough. Again, it feels like Mortenson had this idea, but he had no idea how to go about it, and it really does show throughout this entire screenplay, which is just so lacking in basically every way. It also feels like throughout a good portion of this movie, nothing is happening. There is this one scene especially where all of these characters are meeting at dinner, and it goes on for like 20 minutes, and throughout the majority of it, nothing is happening. We're just restating things that we already know. We're seeing Willis just be rude and ignorant and just annoying, and there just really isn't much of anything going on there. And the film just does a horrible job in getting us to know any of these characters and getting us to latch onto any of these characters. It doesn't feel like it cares about that, and I just didn't understand any of the choices that were made here writing-wise. I truly do think this is a disaster of a screenplay, and the dialogue as well is just horrible in this film. I mean, every other word out of Willis's mouth is the F slur, and not that F slur, that F slur that you're thinking of. Like, that's the other word out of his mouth. He's, again, so foul-mouthed in that way, and it felt like Mortenson thought, oh, him saying this is really going to shock audiences, but it really just gets tiring after a while, and you'll probably find yourself checking out of this movie relatively quickly because it doesn't really do anything that different. It starts to feel very repetitive in that way. Viggo Mortensen goes up to his father, talks to him about maybe thinking differently. Willis makes it clear he has no intention of changing. And we spend a portion of the movie with these two just yelling at each other. And, but Mortenson is trying to get his dad to understand because he is so patient in that way, which I don't understand how this character has the patience he does. I really don't. I really don't understand how the character has the patience that he does with the kind of person that he's dealing with here. But regardless, that's basically what goes on this entire movie. There really is nothing going on here story-wise that is going to compel you or excite you. And right when you think something is about to happen, it just goes back to square one. And it just is not a very compelling narrative at all, and it just brings the entire film down. So, besides Willis, every other character in this movie feels so flat. We know absolutely nothing about them. Even John, all we know is that he is a pilot, which they don't really bring up much at all, to the point where I watched this with friends, and one of my friends was generally confused when, at the end of this film, we see him go into a plane. Again, really just speaks to how horribly written a lot of this is. None of the characters here feel like characters. They all feel like stock characters in that way. They feel very much like caricatures that needed a lot more depth to them. They needed a lot more to them. And I think what really hurts the film is that Viggo Mortensen is writing it. It feels like one of those films where he's like, oh, I'll just do everything, but no, he needed a better writer here. He needed a better director, and these are not things that he really thought of, but he really should have, because it would have made the film a hell of a lot better than I think it really is. I think with a good script here, this really could have worked, but Mortensen has no idea how to authentically portray any of these situations, and it just really brings the entire film down as a result. Laura Linney, especially, has nothing to do in this entire movie. In fact, when she first appeared, I was like, wait, he has a sister? Like, they really don't do a good job of introducing her, really fitting her into the story. It just felt like Viggo Mortensen wanted to work with Laura Linney, and he gave her a part in the film, even if it didn't really make sense, even if it didn't really fit into anything, but he did it anyway, and that's what we're stuck with. And again, it's things like that needed another draft. The whole film feels like a first draft. The whole film feels like it needed just a lot more time to be worked on, but Mortensen did not want to put that time into it, and because he was the only one doing everything, nobody could really tell him, let's not do that. Nobody could really tell him, yeah, I don't think that's a great idea. He just kind of did it, and it turned out in the way that you would expect. It turned out very lazily. It turned out very unsatisfactory, and again, that's the other thing that I just really could not stand about this film. So the way that Mortensen portrays dementia in this movie, I think is very problematic because he seems to think that all dementia really is just this guy, you know, almost like looking at his flashback. That's a lot of what this is. He's looking at his flashback. He's thinking about things. It doesn't feel like a realistic portrayal of dementia at all. It doesn't even really feel like the dementia needs to be here. It kind of just feels like that's here so they can be like, oh, this is why he is this way. But I didn't really see it as that. I saw it as, no, this is just a horrible old guy overall. He's never been a good person, and he certainly is not good now, and he doesn't really feel like he wants to change, so, like, what's even the point, really? The film doesn't really feel like it has one, and that's another thing that just really doesn't work here. Easily, I think the screenplay is the weakest element of this entire movie. There are a lot of things that don't work here, but the screenplay is easily the most baffling of them all. I can't believe that Mortensen made the choices that he did in this movie because it really does the film no favors at all. It just makes the film that much worse, honestly. The cinematography as well, I think here, is really not that great. It feels very cheap. It feels like Mortensen very quickly made this. There really isn't any shots that are particularly all that interesting. There's one shot especially where you can very clearly see a boom mic in it, so again, it's clear that Mortensen just didn't really do anything to take the time to really go about this. He kind of just wanted to rush it out, and that's kind of what we're left with here. They don't do a good job in terms of cinematography. Even the score in this movie is terrible. It sounded like stock music. I was like, there's no way that's the actual score of the movie, but no, it is. It's like this piano that plays, and it's truly one of the weakest scores I've heard in such a long time. I hated every single second of it, and I couldn't believe that it was actually in a mainstream film like this. It sounded like something that I would hear on Incomplete Tech and wouldn't use because it's a horrible piece of music, but yet that's the piece of music they decided to use in this movie. Again, everything in this film is just in the most unpleasant and in an unlikable way possible. There's nothing in this movie that excites you, and I think that's something else that really does bring it down. And the editing here is terrible. The way the film is constantly cutting back and forth, I think the editing is really bad. A lot of the transitions especially, they just feel kind of random. Whenever the flashbacks happen, it never feels like this has a point. It never feels like a natural flow. It just feels like, oh, flashback time now. Oh, let's cut back to Willis as an old man. Oh, now let's cut back to him as, when he was young. And it's very choppily edited in that way. So again, Falling as a whole is just kind of a disastrous film. I don't really know what Mortensen's intention was here. I assume that he was trying to do something different, and I applaud him for it, but really almost every single thing about this movie rang hollow. Every single thing about this movie felt like it was kind of in poor taste. It didn't feel like Mortensen really took the time to do anything with this character. We focus on one of the most unlikable main characters that I can think of in recent memory. It's populated with a lot of flat characterizations as well. It's got some horrible dialogue, a script that just feels so repetitive, almost a directionless script that I legitimately can't tell what Mortensen was really trying to go for. It does have a solid performance from Mortensen overall, but really other than that, there's nothing about this film that I think is appealing. There's nothing about this film that I really would recommend. And it's a film that I just can't believe turned out as bad as it really did. This is easily one of the worst films of the entire year, and I am going to give Falling overall a D. But over, guys, in my review of Falling, how much you guys saw this movie, all of your thoughts, and we'll see you guys in my next video, and we'll see you guys for that. Okay, bye.